So thanks for joining us. Just a quick round of introductions. To my left, I am David Rue. I'm Chair of Postgraduate Programs here at SCI-Arc, so it goes. We have to my left Enric Ruiz-Geli, who's the principal architect and founder of the Barcelona-based architectural firm Cloud9, and he's joined us this summer teaching the summer final semester of the Synthetic Landscape Studio. To my right, we have Shuruq Tramontini, who is a graduate of fiction and entertainment. I first met Shuruq a long time ago at the Städelschule, and she has a complex personal background, which I won't talk about tonight, but maybe you can approach her and ask her about it. She is currently teaching in the fiction and entertainment program, and is I guess your website says creative technologist, but you're trained as an architect. You're producing artworks and media projects using things like game engines and so on, so on, so on. But I guess it's part of, I guess, the ambiguity of what constitutes an architectural practice these days as well. So she's doing some pretty interesting work, working with new media, and I thought perfect for this symposium because I think she is very much exemplifying what I would like to see as an alternative ecological aesthetic. We're also going to be joined, apparently about to walk through the door. We've been texting. Timothy Morton is also going to be speaking. And I consider Timothy to be the most important ecological philosopher right now. And I'm sure most of you are aware of some of his ideas. I first met Timothy through our own Graham Harman, and I was immediately struck by what was then his first book, which was entitled Ecology Without Nature. And I couldn't understand what that could possibly mean. Since then, I have come to understand what's remarkable about that way of thinking about the ecological problem. He is a professor at Rice University, that's his main gig, and he's also teaching in the Synthetic Landscapes program. And the format tonight is we'll each be presenting for 15 minutes. We'll see if we could stick to that. But I believe all four of us are going to be talking about a fairly complex set of ideas, so we'll try. We'll do our best to stick to 15 minutes each. And then the rest of the time, we'll just have a freewheeling discussion, which I'm going to do my best to moderate for your interest. So with that, the title Ecological Aesthetics, the word aesthetics itself, I think, potentially has a seemingly trivial connotation because for the most part, we think of the application of the beautiful as one of the last things we do to kind of decorate reality, if you will, as designers. However, within a different framework, and this is what I consider to be the importance of Graham Harman's work in Ontology, if in fact there is no total access between objects in being, what that constitutes, and there's a kind of cascading set of consequences from the initial observation. And it's as simple as saying, like, for example, I look at Michael Rotundi. I've known him since 1991. We've had many conversations. Do I know Michael Rotundi? Probably not entirely, but will I ever entirely know him? Probably not. But then this might be true of all object-to-object interactions, whether it's my contemplation of this water bottle or the water bottle's relationship to the table, which is, I guess, the oddity of, or the surprising thing of Graham Harman's ontology, that this is not merely the problem of mind's relationship to objects, but this is a basic ontological limit of all object-to-object relationships. Now, if you're with me to that point, there's an odd consequence to this with regards to causality, because isn't causality itself an object-to-object relationship? And if in fact there is no complete access or touching between objects, He concludes all causation is in some sense a vicarious causation. So there's something a little bit mysterious happening in object-to-object relationships. Now, with that, it then very surprisingly promotes aesthetics to first philosophy at that point, because there's something of an aesthetic problem in all object-to-object relationships before any epistemology. Now, this is a very somewhat controversial thought, and it's not like it's definitively accepted by all. Many of my colleagues utterly reject this, as I know. But it has caused quite a stir, and one of the impacts it had was on Timothy Morton, who at the time was a Romantic poetry scholar and was, as he'll admit, a Derrida person. But there was something in that that was like the diamond shot through the forehead. And there you are. Speak of the devil, and there he is. And I was just summarizing for everybody. Hey. Hi. All right.
Hi.
Please
Nice to meet you, Joe.
have a seat at our lovely table. Yeah. Okay. Glad you made it. So at that point, this object-oriented ontology, I think, struck Timothy, I was just speaking about you, as opening up a very unique way of thinking about the ecological problem. So my introductions are complete, and let me begin with some slides. Part of this is a rereading of the small brief that I wrote for today. I tried to make it as edgy as possible to get your interest. In 2001, the British multinational oil and gas company BP Amoco rebranded itself as Beyond Petroleum, abandoning its original name, British Petroleum. Its logo was changed from a dark green shield reminiscent of a British racing green lined in gold to a lighter green symbol of a sun or sunflower consisting of an inner gold layer, a lighter green middle layer, and a darker green outer layer matching its previous shield. There you go. And you may have seen that symbol as you've been driving around Los Angeles. Following this rebranding effort, communicating a commitment to renewable energy and environmental responsibility, came the massive 2006 pipeline spill in Alaska and the catastrophic 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion that resulted in the largest marine oil spill in history. Numerous other examples can easily be cited of similarly contradictory, paradoxical, and agonizing greenwashing strategies in recent times. So for me, I think this is this great symbol of it, like a plastic cup in the trash with, eco stamped on it. But then we have other forms of this as well. Is the green aesthetic a distraction masking a continuation of modern techniques and its extractive logics? Despite the obviousness of the need to call bullshit on such corporate rebranding efforts, it is nonetheless surprising that aesthetics can even be projected onto the ecological at all and bear some consideration. This is meant as a joke. What are the effects of aesthetics on our sustainable practices? Are green aesthetics singular or plural? Are we sure its influence is positive? Are there alternative aesthetics we haven't considered yet? One of the things that's not well known is, for example, the beloved blue bin that we have here in California is the result of a massive PR campaign of primarily centering around ExxonMobil and the plastics industry. And this started almost 20 years ago, where there was a kind of anxiety and fear that the plastics industry might collapse, and therefore a different kind of narrative of recycling would have to be instituted in society, or else goodbye plastic. And we dutifully put our plastic in our bins. I do too. And we don't really know the full story of the cycle of what happens to that plastic, most of which just gets buried around us. Only 10% of plastic ever gets recycled. That is, the ones that are collected anyway. And plastic really can't be recycled more than twice, or else it degrades too much. Somehow, as we dutifully put our plastic in the blue bins, we forget the obviousness of the possibility maybe we shouldn't have plastic. You know, just stop, you know? Yeah. Anyway, meanwhile, there are other aesthetics that are imaginable, and you can see artists like Pierre Huyghe or the flower artists. My apologies, I'm blanking on the name. But there are experiments that are taking place trying to understand other ways to think about the feelings we might have in relationship to the ecological. This image always struck me as indicative of the oddity of generally how we think about our relationship to nature. This icon is referred to as, it's more of a nickname, Christ Geometer. And what you see here is Christ with some kind of representation of the universe in his lap. And there he is holding a compass. So there is some kind of odd kind of precursor to this general idea we might have of what it means to be an architect in the world. The oddity of that ontology is whatever nature is, we're the thing outside of it. We're not inside there. Architecture itself has kind of a dualistic history itself, where there have been some greatest hits of what we do as architect is some kind of extension from the natural order. But then, for the most part, it's more like this, where architecture is the thing that stands apart from nature. This might seem like an extreme case, but how is it really that different from this case? And as unbelievable as that is, that somehow we're the one thing that is outside of nature, that does remain a kind of framework within which we operate, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. When we say nature, we usually think of something like this, something placid. And here, I think you could see maybe something that might be underlying the word sustainability. We are the thing that is outside of nature and intrudes upon nature and fuck it up. Therefore, we should be the ones to go in and fix it. In images like this, we have a kind of imagination of nature as a perpetual equilibrium order. But oddly, we don't see ourselves in pictures like this. We're the thing outside of pictures like this, contemplating it. Once again, like Christ the Geometer. But nature itself is quite crazy. It's a wildly chaotic, entropic order. And there really is no equilibrium to be maintained. We also don't think of things like this. If we're talking about all nature, why aren't we thinking of Uranus? A bubbling cauldron of methane and ammonia in a critical state of matter. Things like this never come to mind. Also, things that might not come to mind, maybe the coronavirus. Why don't we think of these kinds of objects in nature? What's our relationship to that? What does it mean to be sustainable in relationship to things like that? This fellow, Daniel Bodkin, is a fascinating person. He studied forests his entire life. That's his career spans almost 50 years. And he just counted trees in forests. And he has an interesting engagement through the counting of trees in forests to deep geological time. And what he has concluded through a lifetime of study that there never has been an equilibrium state in the forest that he's been studying. It's wildly chaotic. So Bodkin, interestingly, in his book, Discordant Harmonies, points out, well, whatever nature is, we primarily understood it through three grand historical metaphors. One is nature as deity, the thing from beyond, and we just can't comprehend it. It's the domain of the sublime, so to speak. Then this is supplanted in the Enlightenment era of nature as some kind of grand calibrated machinery. And he does point out that we're probably still stuck there with our concepts of sustainable practices. We want to kind of rejigger and modify and calibrate and make more efficient our relationship with the fungible objects of nature. However, he said we're most likely in this new period where we think of nature more like a computer, and talks about things like genetic engineering or hypothesizing that there's maybe something like computation happening in nature itself. But regardless, these are all metaphors. And maybe, and I have a feeling Timothy might speak to this, maybe the word nature itself is a little bit arcane. And maybe we need other language, other words. The sustainability itself, I think, has interesting roots in the mid to late 19th century with the emergence of pollution. This really comes to a head in the 60s and the 70s, where certain things are discovered about the warming planet, and tangible proof begins to be presented by scientists about the impact pollution is having upon us. This is an interesting bit that I found in some essay about the history of sustainability. Let me read it to you. So in 1998, global warming became recognized on a wider scale after NASA scientists testified to the world that the climate was changing. Around this time, though, businesses started to consider environmentalism as a selling point, and coincidentally, this is also where the first mention of greenwashing appears. The term was coined by J. Westerveld in a 1986 essay examining the dubious practices of the hotel industry. To be precise, hotels' tendency to implore guests to reuse towels to help the environment in the absence of any other eco-friendly measures from them. Yep, greenwashing all started with hotel towels, and you can get these notices today. Probably the most dramatic example of the risk management practices of sustainability and green aesthetics is likely the Gherkin, Norman Foster's Gherkin in London, which shattered any kind of limit that was set at the time of height restrictions. And it was argued that this was an important kind of symbol of the rise of British culture ahead of the 2012 Summer Olympics. It was the kind of standard bearer of nearly every sustainable technology you can imagine: rotating louvers, chimney effect stuff, sustainable materials, cladding. And as my colleague Jonathan Massey so brilliantly does some investigative reporting on in this great essay, Risk Design, nearly all of these systems failed almost immediately. And the most hilarious of which is the detached floor plates from the double-paned curtain wall system with rotating, modulating louvers to control sunlight, that the chimney effect actually also caused an absolutely hilarious acoustical problem. And so within a year, all of those gaps between the floor plate and the facade were sealed up because people just couldn't work anymore with all the noise, and the chimney effect was gone. Everything starts failing, but fails on the down low. But the important thing is, though it cost the developers $220 million to make the building, including the price of land, the building was sold 6 years later for 3 times that amount. So it's an outrageous success. Anyway, just a bit of a cold shower before I hand it over to Timothy. In its latest report, the Climate Change 2023 Synthesis Report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has given its final warning as the emissions curve is not bending yet. On the contrary, between 2010 and 2019, we experienced the highest levels of emissions in human history. Climate action and progress has been made, and there are solutions available for mitigation and adaptation. However, this is not enough to respond to the crisis. I think if you read the rest of the report, it does imply that we might have passed the tipping point. Immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors are needed urgently. According to the IPCC report, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires a peak before 2025. Reduce emissions by 43% by 2030, 60% by 2035, and net zero by early 2050. What's interesting to me is probably the most dramatic technological development is in recent years is direct air carbon capture, but that technology does not map very well onto the current green aesthetics that we have. So there's tremendous resistance towards the incorporation of such technologies, but may not have much choice. But it remains to be seen. I think we all have a lot of soul-searching to do. Meanwhile, NASA reported that June 2023 was the hottest ever recorded on planet Earth in aggregate. So with that wonderful news, I give you Timothy Morton.
Why, thank you. How long do I have to talk?
Oh?
How long do I have, David?
I would say 15, 20
15, 20 minutes, yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Tim. It's lovely to see you, everybody. It's lovely to see my fantastic friend, David. Took me out to an incredible meal last night. It's lovely to see my students here. Old students and new students. I'm hoping that we can hang out a little bit while I'm right here. So I woke up this morning actually to a meme that my friend Sarah put on Instagram. And Sarah is a Australian environmental activist, was an actor. Visualize Kylie Minogue as almost the spitting image of Kylie Minogue, another Australian actor. And the meme, and this is relevant to David's point that he's just made. The meme is a chap in actually a hotel room, and he's calling you saying, "Hi, I'd like a wake-up call." And the person at the desk is saying, "The 7 hottest days on Earth in the last 100,000 years all happened in the last week." One of the things about ecological aesthetics is that at present they are shocking. So a couple of hours later, The Guardian, which tends to report things first, I was about to see the film Oppenheimer about one of these things called hyperobject, which I talk about a lot. Global warming would be one, a nuclear bomb would be another one. And the Gulf Stream is another one. Sinead O'Connor isn't one, probably, but Sinead O'Connor died. So I got a little message on my phone that Sinead O'Connor, the singer, Nothing Compares to You version of Prince song, very, very beautiful, intense version of it, and she had just died. So I turned to The Guardian, and the Guardian headline was, Gulf Stream could collapse by 2025. Do you know what the Gulf Stream is? The reason why Europe isn't in an ice age permanently is the Gulf Stream. The reason why this part of America isn't completely burning on fire is the Gulf Stream. Like I say, ecological aesthetics involves some kind of shock. And if you're not feeling shocked and panicked by what's going on in the world right now, then, well, I guess I could say I can't help you, but actually I should help you. I should be able to help you. People like me should be able to help you if you're not feeling appropriately shocked by the fact that a major engine of climate is the Gulf Stream is about to collapse as early as 2 years from now. Whether or not we do anything about carbon emissions, burning fossil fuels has resulted in the imminent collapse. Maybe 2050, that's when my daughter will be 46. It's when my son will be 41. Yeah, at that point, the Gulf Stream will collapse. They have family in Britain. Britain will be under, New York City will be underwater. You remember the Al Gore film, The Inconvenient Truth? was predicting that by a certain point, if fossil fuel burning keeps happening, New York City will be underwater mostly. Well, that could be starting 2025. So like I say, don't shoot the messenger, but part of ecological aesthetics is, aesthetics means how you feel, right? Aesthetics comes from a Greek word, aisthanesthai, which means to perceive. Yeah, so it's like how you see things and smell things and feel things, and it can also be touch, right? Also, it can also be proprioception, how your awareness of your body in space. And aesthetics of ecology fundamentally right now is to do with shock. That's why I'm involved in it. I'm trying to figure out how to help people understand what's going on and not freeze, right? This is not the moment to freeze with the shock. Have to find a way to be flexible. If you're in Gen Z, which is pretty much everyone in this room, and my daughter, and my son, part of that is how to feel not like dying if you have a pulse, which you do. How to not feel like dying and how to not feel like murdering people like me and all the previous generations, going back at least to the point of settler colonialism, right? Like one of the main drivers of this is settler colonialism. Yeah, America is the prime example of it. Let's move a lot of species around the world. Let's move a lot of human beings who we've enslaved around the world, Britain and France mostly. I'm looking at you. Let's create a huge pile of wealth. Why is America the richest country on the planet? Because of slavery. Then let's automate that shit using fossil fuel burning engines, the steam engine. And so one of the reasons why this is happening is that, right? There are forces out there in the world right now trying to make us not notice, try to sort of turn a blind eye to the legacy of slavery. One of the legacies of slavery will have been, by possibly 2025, the Gulf Stream collapse. Yeah, we have to treat each other nicely, more nicely than we have been. How human beings treat each other is how human beings treat other life forms. So entering white supremacy and patriarchy are very, very high, number one, equal on my list, for to-do list, for how to achieve an ecologically just world. Again, a lot of this is to do with a feeling of shock. If you haven't been aware yet, or if you're just hearing it, or if you're hearing it the right way, if you're feeling some kind of panic, because I certainly did when I saw the headline, Jesus, The reason we don't know is another kind of aesthetics, which is, the interpretations of the data were aestheticized to look nice and gentle and soft by scientists who had never taken a humanities class and so didn't know that they were in a belief space that they didn't control when they were talking to the media. They were trying to convince deniers. There's an article about this from a few years ago in Scientific American. There were some really scary data points, and they decided to ignore those data points and go with the less scary data points and interpret those to mean in the least scary possible way to convince deniers you've already lost. If you're trying to convince that kind of subject position, you have already lost. Yeah. So part of this ecological aesthetics is how to make effective propaganda, which is just a dirty word for art, which is just a polite word for propaganda. Or is it a dirty word for propaganda? I can never figure out whether art is a polite or a dirty word for propaganda. Thank you for not laughing at all at that. It was a thank you for slightly laughing at my thank you for not laughing at that. Panic is panic. It comes from the Greek word pan. Pan means everything, right? Panic is the everything feeling. Yeah. Panic is the feeling that everything is happening, everything. And we got a little glimpse of it during COVID, right? Like widening our sense of time and space a little bit to include people that we weren't going to see today because we might give them COVID, right? And our sense of time, like people, things that we're not going to do in the short-term future because of COVID. just change the frame of reference just a tiny little bit, your whole world changes, right? You've ever been in a faraway place with jet lag, and the light switch is just a little bit different, right? And it's a little bit on another part of the wall than you're used to, different height, and it totally changes your world, yeah? So a little bit of a time frame change, and suddenly you can see lots of different time. That's what happened to me. You know, panic is the everything emotion, and panic is the antechamber, is the sort of the waiting room for the grief. Yeah, panic is like pre-grief, and grief is the is everything. Yeah, the feeling side of everything that you absolutely can't cope with. Yeah, because it's always bigger and heavier than you. Right, it's the one thing that totally and utterly crushes this idea, which is a white supremacy idea mostly, that human beings are like the command control of their emotions, right? And the job is to control the emotions. That we've been trying that for ages. It's called Europe and its after effects. It hasn't worked very well. So yeah, it's realistic to feel panic, and it's a signal that some grief may occur. And you really want that to happen sooner rather than later, because it's that's going to actually connect us to ourselves as well as to one another, and to enable us to get through this, you know, whether or not carbon capture works, whether or not Elon Musk's decision to change the name of Twitter has any measurable effect on the biosphere, whether or not some billionaire is coming to save us, whether or not a God is coming to save us. You know, that Heidegger famously said towards the end of his life, only a God can save us now. Because he wasn't quite sure which God. A whole bunch of titanic, godlike beings have shown up since 1945, the atom bomb, global warming. I've just escaped from Houston, which is in a heat dome. A heat dome is a gigantic thing, like a hurricane. You know, I was in Hurricane Harvey. I was trying to tell my European friends the size of this thing. It's a hyperobject. It's a thing that's so big that you can't see or feel all of it at once, but unfortunately or not, you can understand it. The diameter was from London to Copenhagen, was how he explained it. And they were like, what? You know, they were texting me like, how was the hurricane? Is it finished yet? He said, no, it's sitting over most of Texas, like the diameter is London to Copenhagen. Same with this heat dome, right? Because of global warming, the cold air, the faster moving molecules in the cold air above the heat are attracted into the heat, thus creating a kind of vacuum seal, right? Then this part gets hotter, then the heat seal gets tighter. Then this part gets hotter, the heat seal gets tighter. That's going to be a lot of the Western USA in a few years' time, stuck inside numerous heat domes. The heat dome just moved north, right? You can tell it moved north because now it's only 90 degrees every day, burning sunshine, as opposed to 100, 101, 102, 103. These are all global warming effects. I'm out of my mind with anxiety, panic, fear for my kids. Green aesthetic has to start with that, right? Has to start with the bad news. Yeah, this is really happening, right? Like here's another aesthetic object for you, horror movie. Yeah, as a survivor of bad stuff that I'm writing about right now, I'm here to tell you that the rule number one of how to survive a horror film, you know, the coup on the Capitol was like that. There's lots of white guys tumbling over each other, hitting people with flagpoles and stuff. And you know, the fascism is like people doing that in public, disinhibited people, and you kind of can't believe it's happening. They've already won, right? Rule number one, Ripley, alien rule, number one of how to survive a horror movie, you are in a horror movie. This is not another kind of movie. This is not yet, I wanted to get to the comedy part. You know, I was going to talk all about symbiosis and how the fundamental driver of aesthetics as such is ecological, right? Is to do with our insertion into the biosphere, right? How actually also beauty goes at least all the way down to beetles, as Charles Darwin points out, and this beauty is fundamentally trans. Yeah, it doesn't depend upon gender. It doesn't even depend upon species. You think peacock tails are sexy? I rest my case. So the evolution driver is a sort of trans beauty and symbiosis, and of course, random genetic mutation, random with respect to current need, right? If Steve Jobs had designed my ears, they'd be little pinpricks, but where's the fun in that, right? The universe is a nasty, vengeful place, but life is a part of the universe that has mercy on itself, right? By slowing time just a little bit. So that this thing here is a little bit like the thing that was the same, the baby version. And so that's a good reason to give a shit. Life is a beautiful accident. Yeah, art is a beautiful accident. You fall in love with somebody, it's a beautiful accident. You can't tell whose fault it is in that moment, and it's as if it's been always true, but it's not been always true. So it has this wonderful, weird, subjunctive, as if quality to it. It's accidental and it's subjunctive, right? We're about to enter an age of horribly indicative, horribly subjunctive, like might be. Yeah, might be is about to be burned to a cinder by is. What was the power of the I have a dream speech? It was basically, there might be a world where black kids and white kids have a nice time with each other without hurting each other, without the white kids being told they can't play. That was the power of it, right? The power of Martin Luther King was to suggest there might be another world, might be possible, yeah? While you're feeling crushed by panic, I want you to do something for me, which is talk to another American person, please. Preferably someone who lives not where we are right now, and not in New York City, but where I live and up in the Midwest, okay? Doesn't have to be anybody in particular. Just find somebody to talk to about this if you care, and try to encourage them to understand something, right? In order to do this, you have to actually have a way of talking to them that isn't about bludgeoning them, because they have an antidote to the bludgeoning, because they have, unfortunately, a more sophisticated rhetoric and a philosophy than I do. I'm just going to say it. Yeah, most ecological speech is in the language of revenge. I'm about to see my friend Adam McKay tomorrow. He made a film called Don't Look Up, and it was about a comet coming to destroy the Earth, right? And the lamestream media won't cover it. Evangelicals already know there's a comet, or real or metaphorical, coming to destroy the Earth. It's called the apocalypse. And they also know the lamestream media won't cover it, and they're protected against you're going to be laughing on the other side of your face when you realize the science was right, by a simple idea, which even the simplest, stupidest version, the most exclusive, dumbest version of, which is better than the revenge stuff that people like me have trained you to think ecology, with, which is Jesus loves you anyway. Jesus loves you anyway. You have to talk to someone who knows that Jesus loves you anyway, and you have to make them know that another world than this is possible, that they don't have to get behind the idea of the planet burning, that the apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean, we should just burn Earth on fire, because actually in the book of Revelations it says that you'll be judged if you destroy the Earth. That is a sentence in the book of Revelations. We all need to get friendly with how to talk to these guys, because why? Because they're the reason why this is happening and continues to happen, right? They're looking for a religious war, and if we don't do it to ourselves, then we won't be able to convince China or Russia or India or anywhere else. Doesn't matter about Europe, doesn't matter how progressive they are, right? So aesthetics, right? How to talk to people, how to persuade them. Did Martin Luther King, or even Malcolm X for that matter, for 1 second go, you're going to be there when you da-da-da? They were rousing and inspiring and intense, right? And they made you feel like something was possible, some kind of future where the future could be different from the past. They were on the side of life, right? Life means the future can be different from the past. That's what it means. Yeah, life is based on quantum theory. Quantum theory can generate real random numbers that cannot be predicted by a mechanism. Therefore, quantum theory is telling us that we live in a universe where the future can, theoretically be different from the past. Hold on to that, because we're about to enter a moment when all the mechanical stuff that we did, first of all, with white people doing it to everybody by enslaving people, and then all the way that was automated by machinery, is about to create mechanisms that are very hard to stop, right? When they say tipping point, what they mean is the trembliness of our world is about to get crushed by a mechanism that doesn't have an off switch. Yeah? Thank you very much.
All right, so great to be here. Timothy, thank you for this. I make the note of not to freeze, like not to freeze. So I think the work of Cloud9 is furious and is active, and it's maybe helping the conversation. Thank you, David, for allowing me to be here, and it's quite a moment. Obviously, we as architects, thinkers, and makers, and so we use projects and pilot projects to kind of fight and to kind of bring maybe vitamins, no, to not to surrender. I think this is an atlas of the projects Cloud9 has been doing these past years. This selection here is the ones that deal with physics, and I'm so thankful that you are talking about quantum physics. And physicists like Josep Perelló have changed the way we think, and molecular cuisine like Ferran Adrià is doing has also changed the way the scale and the kind of the making and the performance to architecture. These projects show this. There are moments of fight, like here, designing an aviary. So this was Barcelona calling for a new house to the collection of animals in the city. And architects didn't show up because they didn't show up. But we as a generation did show up, thinking on Cedric Price, aviary in London, but also thinking on we are ecology, we are nature, we are part of this, we want to kind of fight out. So this was the winning render. We approached this from a mathematical, in relationship to Penrose. This building is 3 times SCI-Arc, so you get a sense of the cables and the scale. It's great to have flamingos as clients. It's something. You start to know about density, flying path, distance, and heat, but also that architecture can be the structure of the ecology. So these are branches where the steel structure and the ecology that the birds need, and then maybe there is a kind of half-half agreement between the two. This is a model of this aviary. We are scanning real trees. We are implementing path and steel, and then polymers, and then rhino, and then you start milling, and this becomes a living structure. It's using hydroponics, it's using sensors and humidity, and trying to map out what birds do. Completely agree that the life of this is an accident, so this is the structure of the accident. This is the prototype, one of these branches. This is the scale of this space we are now. And so there is a possibility to have these two realities, nature, architecture, structure together as one. In San Sebastian, we were looking at how to bring this culture of energy into condition in which we have to address waves, structure of waves using fiberglass. So these things move, and then this becomes a moving structure according to the waves, according to the sound, and the wind loads. And this is a space. So it's a space that we live in to understand water, and we as with our skin, with our porosity into water. It hosts people and species, and It is a fight against buildings that are made out of glass, that are an auditorium. So I would love to start to see waves inside waves, and waves are buildings, or waves are surface, or waves are landscape. But landscape is an accident too. So maybe it's starting to have all of this together. This was the Financial Times, so interested in a very small house that had a green roof. The importance here was the kind of, we were breaking the urban regulation and no longer have a roof, no longer have the ceramics there, but having this landscape that would allow us to kind of double the size of the house. So it started, and then somehow, no, Financial Times is there paying attention. If you look at forests, you understand as a seed that there is a time, there is a structure, there is mutations. Seeds are building fruits for us, are producing, they know where the wind is, they know where the water is. So these things are extremely important to bring into architecture to increase complexity. This is one of these devices that we created back then. So it's an artificial leaf. It works as a leaf. So when you see a leaf right here outside, and then you see this device, the amount of technology that we are embedding. So battery, energy, sensors, this device knows it's by night, it's by day, it collects energy and makes decisions about how much energy. So if you have 9,000 of these devices, then you start to have buildings that are more than buildings, but are energy diagrams of the day and the night and every day and every night. So that's what the citizens around the building see. So the building becomes this platform to build empathy to the neighbors of the building. So the day was like this. So what is it? What is the energy around us? And there is energy towards the north of the building because there's energy around us. And ultimately there's a building, because there is a building, because there is a program. And this ends in a model, and then the model has computers and sensors and all of these devices, and then the MoMA shows interest, and then this becomes part of the MoMA collection. Is it green architecture? It's something that deals with performance and time. And Terry Riley, who invited us to participate in this exhibition, said it's the first time you're bringing theater and performance into architecture together into one thing. So as you know, we do stage design, and this is part of our understanding of nature too. Nature is a stage. This is another landscape, is a landscape that belongs to our memory in Coney Island. And this landscape becomes a platform. The platform becomes a landscape. The landscape becomes a place where condensation happens. We are collecting condensation, and people are inside this condensation. It is to understand we are water. I think you said this very well, no? We are together, we are water. So maybe it's about humidity, water, condensation, atmosphere. We are building trees. I suggest you to start building trees. William McDonough discussed the idea that buildings should be trees, so we are going straight to trees, building structure. This is in France, in Brest. Again, with the making in the back, and somehow this starts to become a place where people are having conversations about nature and the shadow of a tree and the performance of a tree. This building is the Media ICT building. You know, we built it in Barcelona in a key moment. In 2010, we wanted to send a very strong message out there that net zero buildings are possible. So if we are looking at any option to decrease global warming and global impact, and so we do need net zero. So it was a way to produce a manifesto of a public building, and you can go and see the technology and what it works. Is a living lab. One of the things we wanted to do is to use nitrogen to produce a vertical cloud. So the system uses nitrogen to produce these particles that are heavy. We include a natural oil so that they have gravity, and it produces this condensation, and it allows the building to stop UV light. It shows like this, so that's kind of a summer condition in the middle of the peak, so it moves from transparency to translucency. I think it's important the role of the schools, as David, you were kind of pushing. This is the Art Center, a group of students suggesting this condition of learning biomimicry and understanding, again, landscapes, complex landscapes, the idea of making, going into nature, and then building things, you know, like building to fight, building to produce knowledge, to gain expertise, and again, no, and do not freeze, no, like go for it. And streamlined structures using not plastics and oil, but on the contrary, resin from the trees, and those resins allow us to produce these layers, and then these layers produce this space for meditation, to love a partner, to stay, to live, to be, to survive, to make it. The same, this is a space for Ferran Adrià in El Bulli, the understanding of a place like a national park, Cap de Creus, which is dead, like as dead as Death Valley, but as you know, it's dead, but there is life. There is life. So using fiberglass, extremely light surface that produces this inside space with this condition where architecture, nature, landscape, space, materials, shadow, atmosphere, energy, but also content, molecular creativity of Bulli, they all are encapsulated in this, I feel, piece of architecture of hope, which I am an activist, and I was fighting against this project. At the same time, I was the architect of the project. So I was against doing anything built, but I was designing something that is not architecture built in the space. So that's somehow the contradiction of our generation moving forward. Looking at clouds, and as you said, the heat dome, we are able to produce domestic architecture that needs to start to think of living labs as a way to live among these conditions and landscapes. I think it is a landscape. It is a landscape of leaves, and these leaves help us to understand the way every drop of water is collected in a very indigenous way. At the same time, it produces a monster of a house as a villa. Going inside the building of Calatrava, which belongs to another kind of generation and aesthetics, for sure. Building the idea of cells inside, building a serious landscape, bringing birds and rain and pollution and the real atmospheric collapse in which we are, but building landscapes. So landscapes that allow us to think, to live, to be, like ceramic surface that allow us to have the right heat, or ecology space in which bats are being nurtured, and it's the home of bats for Valencia at this point, or a cloud that is linked to data and oceans and allow us to see the temperature of the oceans change in real time, and we are there understanding or feeling some empathy about it. At the same time, there is this invisible air that is inside the space, but it is there, and in fact, it moves around, and the fact that it moves, it builds these invisible structures and architectures that we want to learn from. No, here we go. And finally, this park in Korea, again, no, to fight and find conditions in which landscape operates. This is a bridge that helps us to go from one part of the park to the other one, but it also helps migration and birds and other species that belong to this condition. So it's both, and it has to be, it's a way to understand landscape again. We are also not producing a building, but pushing for the understanding of a tree again, to understand the condition. And for the first time, we are looking at moss. And this, David, this is like, let's say, nuts, no? One would say. We are farming the skin of the building. So we are, for 2 years, growing the moss that will absorb the CO2 of this site and this condition to turn the place net zero, no? But it means we are starting to farm. We need to farm. Farming a landscape that would go here, and this would go here, and this is moving forward. Maybe to finish, this is another part of this project. I want to really say something about the work in the program. I'm so grateful to be this summer here, and I hope to be more with you at the school. And it's key to be here and in the discussions that we're having, understanding landscape in a very capitalist, universal, studious way, as you can see. But what if next generation, and they are here sitting on the floor, what if the next generation starts to do some skate in Death Valley in the morning to start to really address heat, you know? Maybe we can change our point of view, or we can start to understand the way in which roots have been here 2,000 years. We can start to understand that these trees are alive and we have to embrace them. We have to go inside of them to not to forget that anything we do could increase nature, increase our landscape, not decrease, but increase, as we are trying to do here at the Watermill Center. And I think you are coming this weekend. David, thank you for this. And to end, maybe things like, these are things that have happened in Montana, no? Tribes have agreed, there's bisons being reintroduced, and the project deals with public policy, renaturalizing, performance, wildlife, and so on. So that's the scale of the challenge, I think, and that's the scale of the beauty of it. All right. 18 minutes.
David, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really happy being here and really interested in where this discussion is going to go. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shuruq Tramontini. I am part of the faculty of the Fiction and Entertainment program, which is the other postgraduate master program, one of the other 4s. But I also work as a creative technologist, both for artists from the new guard and from the old guard. And today I will present to you ecologies that I produced in the course of my work, both in virtual spaces and in games. And taking here ecology as a science of interrelations between organisms and between organisms and their environment, I would like to expand that and think of 3D assets and their relationship in virtual worlds. And then expanding also ecology as a kind of coded intelligence. So the way I will structure my presentation today is by going through certain components of virtual worlds, and these include intelligence systems, meaning coded intelligence and simulations, then the interaction and game design, so the rule of the viewer, the relationship to the assets, different moods and atmospheres, and then last but not least, the potential of storytelling and actually inhabiting worlds through environmental storytelling and speculations. So when I talk about ecologies, I'm not going to talk about ecologies that simulate something of the real or the physical, but I will actually, so not mimicking something that already exists, but seeing this more in a playful way and an artful way that hopefully makes us see new things, feel new things, and also be a part of something alternative. So I would like to start with this project called 1,000 Lives. This is a project by Ian Cheng, which was shown this year in a gallery in London. And it's a life simulation of a turtle who explores this confined space that it's in, and the viewer can watch how it grows and interacts with its environment. The turtle lives in this apartment and interacts with props that are scrambled around the floor, such as jars or bottles or fruits and urchins. And it really explores the limits of this environment and the general mess that it's exposed to. But over time, it also learns and changes its behavior. Here you can see a very technical slide, but just to give you a bit of insight or a behind the scenes into how an intelligence can actually be coded and how these interrelations of properties and values can lead to assimilation. So the turtle has general needs or motivations, and these then turn into actions, but these actions have different strengths. So that in turn is related to the general metabolism and the needs, and it's kind of random what kind of action the turtle is gonna execute next. And all of these parameters then feed into this general, or what we would call feeling, what you see in the top right corner. So it constantly fluctuates from feeling neutral or bored or worried or grief. And in the end of the day, this turtle remains as much of a 3D asset as any other prop in this environment. But there is something sinister and something spooky almost, I think, that we can really feel when we watch the turtle and how it navigates the space, how it gets lost, and how we can feel its inconsistency in making actually choices or consistent paths. So in my own work that I produced here at SCI-Arc, back when I was a student, I also explored this feeling of not interacting, but like feeling with a non-human entity, and how that could relate to the player's perspectives or the player's viewpoints even. So in this virtual reality experience, an octopus leads the player through the space, and it's a bit dramatic at the end as the octopus gets pulled into the depths of the ocean and the player ends up all alone and has to navigate and being pulled by underwater currents. So if we talk about this change of perspective and feeling that we can have with a non-human entity, can also environments generate something like that? I mean, in film they can, but can environments in virtual worlds actually generate and feed into this certain mood that is untouched from me, the creator? So what I explored here, I used real-time data that came live and direct from the ocean, and then these values tweaked certain parameters of the world. So for example, fog or color or the asset spawning were always different every time that you played. And this leads me to Life After Bob, a project also by Ian Cheng, which I've been working on now for 4 years. This is a real-time animation, which is produced totally in Unity. Unity is a sibling of Unreal. I think most of us here know it. Anyways, so really quickly about the story, it's about a scientist who develops a new AI model that gets installed inside the nervous system and that helps us live our lives better. And this scientist actually tests it out on his own daughter. So the overarching question here is, of course, our relationship to AI, but also the basic feelings and emotions that could generate in us. So feelings of jealousy or love or sadness towards another intelligence. So this entire world was created. It was set in 2074, and one of the main one of my favorite spaces was the Wavyverse. And the Wavyverse is a mental space in which the characters could project and could show their state of being in the nervous system, and they could also share these dreamlike experiences amongst each other. So for a long time, the big question was, how do we conceptualize and design such spaces that actually don't exist and that we don't have any visual references for? And also, how can we animate an environment that reacts and responds to a character's actions, thoughts, or motives? So my job was to do a lot of set dressing and, or as self-contained ecologies or small vignettes. And together with Ian and the entire team, we conceptualized these spaces. And it was my job to then develop the design and the general feel of them. So in video games, and of course in any framing of an image, there's this thing called environmental storytelling, so that the environment can actually give a lot of background and subcontext that feeds into a general narrative. And in this scene, we see Chalice, the main character, who just lost 10 years of her life after her AI model, Bob, was droning her or was inhabiting her body. And she doesn't know who she was in these 10 years. So going through all of these props and exploring the environment, she has to piece together, or she has to piece back together her identity and who she is. And the viewer is given little to no context to what actually happened in these years. And but by looking at and exploring the props and the environment, we're invited to become almost like an archaeologist and an active participant in the storytelling process itself. So so the viewer can determine who this character actually was, or who this AI version of this character was in the 10 years. And yeah, can create a certain truth on their own terms. In parallel to the animation, there was the world watching mode. The world watching mode was a bit more like a video game because the viewer actually had control. So you could control the story with your smartphone, and you can go back or rewind, fast forward. But most importantly, you could pause and actually explore the 3D space and explore everything that is around you. And all of those assets, so the props and the background characters and the locations, they were all tied to this wiki. And in the wiki, anybody could make changes and modifications and edits. And this, on the other hand, fed back into the film. So it was almost like this co-creation space. With a lot of subplots and narratives that came from different authors. So the last project that I want to show today is this project called Variants by the artist Pierre Huyghe. This is a site-specific project which is set in Norway. And the entire forest here was 3D LiDAR scanned. And the physical forest was, or inside the physical forest, different sensing devices were placed that captured monitoring data. And so there was a physical forest, which was part of the installation, and then there was also the digital forest. The physical forest had living systems, such as beehives or ant piles, that of course have a life of their own. But then there was also the simulation of the digital forest that also has a life of its own. And the digital props were informed by the physical and vice versa. And this almost created a melding of both ecologies. The viewer experienced this work standing in the middle of the forest, and looking at this huge LED screen. And the reason why this is a simulation is because there are two intelligence systems here. So there is the intelligent camera through whose view the viewer experiences the forest. And this camera, similar to the turtle, had also agent-like properties. So it had agent-like properties and feelings that led to actions and behaviors. So it would learn what was interesting, it would learn where to go and how quickly to move between 2 points, and also where to stop, observe, and linger. The other intelligence system here are these intelligent mutations. And these are very speculative. Their growth and their state of living depends on the data input of the sensory devices. And this constantly keeps the forest alive. This is a permanent installation. So who knows where both the physical and the virtual forest is going to be in 10 years. And here the human was completely taken out of the work. There was no main character and no main protagonist, but these coded intelligences or other intelligences actually came into the foreground and became the main characters. And also here, the forest had its own feeling to it, almost its own spirit also, that we could inhabit and coexist in. And the question, of course, was how do we visualize this and how do we aestheticize it? And this always went back and forth between the virtual and the physical, but also between Pierre and my own suggestions and the team. So as I come to the end of my presentation, I would like to point out to this idea between world building and worlding. So where world building is creating an entire world with, let's say, traditional cinematic tools. So something that is set in 2050 here in Los Angeles, it has a linear story in which characters unfold and develop. Worlding becomes something that is a bit more random. It's more like setting something in motion or like placing seeds and making space for surprise and aliveness, but most importantly, not thriving for perfection, but tending to a set of relations that have the potential to cultivate on their own and then create something new that keeps on going. So, and maybe it can be seen as a role of an architect versus the gardener. But I myself am trained as an architect, and now I have a bit more broad experience as a creative technologist, and I'm part of the SCI-Arc faculty. So, of course, I think a lot about where this is going and how we can all keep up with these newest tools and techniques and the newest meta-human releases and AI models, and how do we develop and incorporate pipelines that make sense. And I don't know, I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a lot about control versus improvisation, or even seriousness versus play, and not always aiming for the best or for the absolute perfection. And in all of this, learning to feel comfortable and letting go of a certain kind of control. And maybe this way we make space for not only new things, but other things.
That was great, thank you. Okay, that was a lot, and we're an hour and 20 minutes in, and rather than demand more attention, I'm going to try and get this discussion going by seeing if we can start directly with a question from the audience, and then we'll use that question as a prompt to get a discussion going. let's see if that can work, okay? So if any of you would like to kick us off, I see a hand that went up. That was a mistake, you know, I saw it. And you will ask the first question, and we'll see if we can respond.
I'm never quite sure if it's a question or a comment or provocation.
Comments are fine too. Judgment is fine too.
I was really interested in the question you ended on regarding the architect as a gardener, and specifically the architect as embodying maybe like a different set of role or values than maybe is traditionally held within the field of architecture. And that kind of ideology up against architects as kind of manipulating and copying maybe what they're finding, or like the biomimicry of architecture, and the positioning that I think we can find ourselves in as we engage with the future of the world, global warming, et cetera, like our craft, like what our position, what our role is, as technologies evolve, as political concerns evolve. But yeah, that is my rambling.
Yeah,
or
that
muse.
sounds like a question for Shuruq to
Yeah.
start up, because it does seem like a question, comment about, do these things require some transformation of what the word architect means? Right? Did I understand that right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of
okay.
but like I would agree with this idea of stepping into an alternative role or definition of how we take from other disciplines to explore and how we engage with their practice,
Okay.
As opposed to trying to transform the material.
I think there's something we can all comment on, but you did say something about
I
what
said,
it means to be an architect here. So
well,
Goes to you.
I didn't say anything, or maybe not directly about what it means to be an architect, but more if we should tend to be more like a gardener versus an architect. Because Timothy's talk is scary, I think, and also I know that from my mom. My mom lives in Germany, and I think like she really has climate anxiety. And also when I read like the German news in the app, like it's terrifying. So, but what exactly should we do? I don't know. So I think one way of maybe how I comfort myself, or what I tell myself, is that everything is happening so fast. Like I can never, especially as a creative technologist and teaching the students technical skills, I don't know like how, I guess we can't keep up anymore with everything that is happening. So I find a comfort in the idea that maybe it's not about like creating something static and something like an ultimatum, but more tending to something, caring for something, going back to see where it's at in its growing state, and yeah, patiently looking at things develop.
yeah, maybe we can return to something Timothy said. This was a new thing I hadn't heard you speak about, the etymology of the word panic. And the state of panic you just described, but it's a feeling that probably we all have, especially with the weather being what it's like today.
Yeah.
Is panic maybe the right mood that we can lean into a little bit in a new way?
Yes, but you see, the thing is, and this is where I've really enjoyed listening to people talking today. Something horrible and vast is happening, yeah? The way we think of that needs to change. The way we think of that is that it's some kind of Pac-Man that just eats all the smaller stuff that we do so that it doesn't matter, right? The way you hear what I say is influenced by a very predominant way of thinking, which is that something physically bigger is ontologically bigger, yeah? To be interested in ecology is to be interested in wholes. You have to believe in wholes with a W, right? Because a forest is a whole, right? It's composed of parts an ecosystem as a whole, right? A narrative, whether it be on using software, artifacts, or words from a dictionary, is a whole composed of various parts, right? An algorithm is a whole made of parts. A city is a whole made of parts. And unfortunately, we have this idea that the whole is bigger. Ontologically, right? Something physically bigger is more important than something smaller, and therefore we feel crushed, right? This is exactly what fascism wants you to think, because the extreme version of this holism is the fascist one, right? You see the eagle, the American eagle, and in the coat of arms, as it were, of America, the eagle's holding the bunch of sticks. That's in Latin called a fasces, from which we get the word fascism. The sticks are only strong because they're in a bunch or a gang, right? You don't mean anything. Your membership of the fascist party is what gives you the meaning. Yeah, your supposed race is what gives you the meaning or the power, right? That's the white supremacy, right? This is a fascist form of holism, and it's not going to help us to unfreeze, right? How to unfreeze? Just because something's physically bigger doesn't mean it's ontologically bigger, spiritually bigger, metaphysically bigger, yeah? There's only one America, yeah, and there are hundreds of millions of Americans, right? Like, why does America have passports and an army, you know, and all that stuff? Because there are so many more of us than there are of it, right? The whole is actually less than the sum of its parts. The whole is less than the sum of its parts. We love to go around talking the whole is greater, right? We've been kind of conned by fascism, but also by most forms of religion out there, most forms of ideology out there, assume that the whole is bigger, therefore more important, right? Something that's physically bigger isn't more important, right? A black hole isn't more important than Earth. Like, oh, fuck it, we might as well just lie around in despair because global warming is going to destroy our world. That's actually, that mindset is sort of part of the problem, yeah? So it's how to panic cheerfully. You know, I'm choosing my word quite carefully. Like, so when somebody wishes me a happy birthday, I usually think automatically happy means not sad, right? And so happy birthday becomes don't be sad birthday. And because I've had some pretty sad things in my life and I get pretty gnarly about them on my birthday, it turns into I'm crying on my birthday and I'm having another one of these bad birthday times. But cheerful birthday, yeah? Whether it's happy or sad or good or bad, I'm going to meet that experience with a smile, cheerful. Beyond normal happy, which is happy versus sad, is transcendently happy, no matter what happens, right? There's an amazing phrase in something I like about Christianity. There's this phrase from, I think it's the Philippians. It's the peace that passes all understanding, meaning whether or not something incredibly chaotic is happening in your world, there is still this peace, the transcendental peace that's actually suffuses everything, including all the bad stuff, right? We need to go there, yeah? When we're creating things aesthetically, which is a political act, right? None of us are talking about the candy sprinkles on the cupcake of politics and science. It's the other way around. This is how politics happens. This is what it is. Right, juxtaposing beings, juxtaposing artifacts, juxtaposing blobs of paint, juxtaposing groups of people, that's politics. Art is politics, yeah? Politics is art, right? Architecture most definitely is politics, right? And so, you know, how to do that in a way that we're not being kind of crushed by this awareness, yeah? Because you have to have the awareness. Otherwise, you're a psychopath. And there's only one kind of person on this earth who does not have anxiety, and that's called a psychopath, right? That's the trouble with the previous president, right? They're very calm as they make everybody else enraged and despairing and rip themselves to shreds, right? Psychopaths are very calm. They have no anxiety, right? What is required right now is something bigger than normally what you think about art, which is a sort of spiritual level here, where you've got to figure out how to have the panic suffused with the peacefulness. Because if you think about it, if panic is the everything emotion, panic also includes joy. Panic also includes love. Panic also includes peace. Panic also includes tranquility, right? There's a reason why the great god Pan, is the panic being, because we are biological beings with, we've got vestigial horns, males have vestigial uterus, we've got nipples, there's this whole kind of beautiful accident universe that we're part of, right? And we are it. Yeah, every mystical, esoteric VIP lounge of every religion on earth is telling you that you are already it. And what is the it, actually? It's your existence as a life form in a biosphere. The Garden of Eden, talking of gardeners, I love this idea of being a gardener, right? Garden of Eden was a millisecond ago, right? You're still there. You're conning yourself into thinking that you're not, because basically chemical signals to your brain arrive a little bit late. This feeling of tantalizingly, where is it, right, is the Garden of Eden. You need to get very serious about this. We need to sort of upgrade our awareness right now to be able to cope with this. Psychic warfare is required, starting with beating the crap out of the subject-object dualism, which is also always a master-slave dualism. Right now. Any art project that hastens this demise of subject-object is good by me.
This discussion about panic reminds me of one of my favorite stories is Captain Cook running aground on the Great Barrier Reef, and very far from Britain, from London, the ship is sinking. They're going to die on the edge of the world. So all legitimate ideas of what to do in such a state of panic goes just out the window because there's no right way to solve the problem. The goal is to live now. And they do some very odd things to plug the hole and save the ship that hadn't been tried before. So what I like about this idea of panic, and that maybe it's not such a negative thing after all, I don't think it's a very good idea to replace one social definition of architect with another, because as far as social definitions go, I think the social definition then makes that labor fungible in capitalism. So maybe all that means is you're making it fungible in another way. So rather than do that, maybe just reject a kind of definition or limit of what we think that word might mean, and instead just use everything you know how to do in the state of panic and engage.
I would love to put a huge, big, positive fluorescent underline underneath what you said. It has a lot to do with giving up something that's really stupid, right? Or a couple of things that are really stupid, that don't work, that are actually just violent, right? And realizing that we've got all the tools inside of us already for how to cope with this, right? Actually. That's what it requires. It does not require some huge, big religious transformation where tomorrow we're all thinking and acting totally differently from how we were now. When was it not true that we were going extinct? Right? When was it not true that we were dying? Right? When was it not true that being in love with someone means you signed up for, forgive me for saying this out loud, but when you're in love with someone, your cat or another human being, whoever that is, right? One of you's going to be dying first, and the other one's going to be holding that other one in their arms, right? When was that not true, right? All of these sorts of feelings are what's happening based on the panic about the world situation, right? The reality of that is now inescapable, right? What a wonderful opportunity to realize that you've actually got the controls, yeah?
I want to add something. Yes. Hello?
I just wonder if maybe how you would feel about an idea that maybe there was an old way of thinking about the whole, and maybe now there's a newer way of thinking about the whole, but that we're still kind of in search of that whole. And maybe, because I understand you have a background in literature as well, and I wonder how you would feel about the Keatsian negative capability as a creative kind of awareness or technique, and how that might tie into this new sense of what a whole could be, a kind of more Charles Olson wholeness that accepts the larger universe and that we're just a part of it.
You might as well have written some of the last few paragraphs of this book that I just wrote. There is only negative capability. It is not a question of the egotistical sublime, as Keats says in that letter, versus negative capability. There is only that. What is meant by this is that to be a creator is to be a kind of a chameleon who is able to take on the, whatever that is, coloration, unquote, of the unquote surface that they are on. Political surface, physical surface, whatever you want to think, surface, right? Human beings are actually super sensitive chameleons who are able to a little bit imagine what is it like to be a lion, what is it like to be a parrot, what is it like to be a tree, right? We can make these things because we can imagine. What is it like? You don't have to imagine it that much. You can imagine it just a little bit. Just a little bit is better than nothing. Yeah. And so this chameleon power that we have, which is what Keats means by negative capability, is very precious, and it's very different from the idea that human beings are the entity that imposes their will on the earth, right? That art is a kind of decision of the ego in the void to impose some kind of pattern that wasn't already there, that is in fact more like, again, gardening is a nice image. Listening, yeah? Why is gardening great? Because it's a form of listening, right? Like, if you've ever been in a band, you'll know that action and passion are kind of the not so opposite, right? You're listening to the music, you're listening to the other people, you're listening to your instrument, you're listening. Acting and paying attention to are much closer together than you might think. And I bet you that if you put an action around a particle accelerator to find out what it was made of, you'd find that the action was made of little dots of appreciating, right? Appreciate is supposedly passive, right? Aesthetic is passive. Act is active, right? Female versus male, object versus subject, slave versus master. All these categories fall under this duality of master versus slave. That's the problem in our world. And I think one of the things that's important about this moment is that that duality is about to collapse, actually. You can see it in the incredible fascist reactions going on right now all around Earth, right? They're reactions to the paper-thin economy and therefore also the paper-thin biosphere, and people beginning to realize that, wow, we are inextricably part of each other. We're inextricably part of this world. And actually, that's a really easy, nice thing to think. It's not a complicated thing to think. The horrible thing to think is that we're actors acting on passive things, just manipulating things. That was never true, which is why making it true was always violent. Taking always the form of, I'm going to teach you a lesson, which isn't really teaching a lesson, it's just hitting something or manipulating something or enslaving somebody.
Enric, you had something you want to say earlier?
Well, looking at the comment, if global warming, one of the main reasons or the first reason, or maybe it's now too late for that, but is the built environment. So I've seen, as you suggest, the situation between the architect and the gardener. So I've seen the way we architects are designing buildings and the way these buildings are becoming the massive machinery to send CO2 emissions and to produce waste. And so we don't have to look far, I think we have to look close to see who are these architects and what kind of thinking, what kind of engineering, what kind of materials, technology. It's very sharp, And I would say maybe the car industry are doing their job, but kind of, or the food industry are doing their job, kind of. So if we focus on this kind of 15 or 28% of the impact on global warming, sometimes 30, sometimes 40, and as architects, we don't want to look at this from the outside, but rather activist from the inside, then to do a net zero building in these hundreds of buildings being built in Barcelona, it's an act of, it's a politic act. It was the same money to do a net zero than to do whatever you see out there. I think we have the possibility to produce pilot projects and seed projects that produce change. This has been spread, and it's happening in many other places. Is it spread enough? No. Is it spread fast? No. Looks like no. But from a knowledge point of view, I've seen this. So farming a building, as we are doing in Korea, is another of these pilot projects. Why? Because we're saying use cork and don't use marble mining in China this way. Use cork and farm moss. So increase nature, increase our capacity to absorb CO2. So yeah, gardener or a maker of nature, yeah. But don't make it architect or gardener. I think we are architects, and we are transitioning, I hope, fast enough. So increasing our knowledge by farming, by ecology, by working with biologists, by having Timothy and David around us, this is what empowers us, but not fighting really much among us, but rather, look, let's work on this, no? And you know, when I met Jeremy Rifkin, who is part of the liberal condition in terms of economy, but in 3 days we stopped the construction of a nuclear power plant. In 3 days, it was a workshop, some Excel files, and the mayor of Houston there leading the president of CPS, and it happened. And he said, well, I'm not going to build 2. I have $16,000 million to build 2. Well, I trust you. I'm going to build 1, and the other $8,000 million goes to architecture, green architecture, city, or sustainable development, something like that. We didn't have enough architects in place to deploy this funding. That's very sad. You know, I think the role of this school is to have these minds ready, because the funding is there, the reality is there, and you will be creative enough, as you have already shown, or as what we are discussing. So yes, farming, yes.
Mm-hmm. You know, earlier it was mentioned.
But not or.
I mean, first, like.
And.
Huh?
No, architect or farmer, like right. Architect and farmer.
Yeah, and this idea of realizing you're in a horror show, horror movie, I think that's really interesting, because one thing I never see in a horror movie is the group of people that's trapped in the haunted house or whatever having ideological arguments. You know, they're talking about other things, and there's always a kind of sense of cooperation, which I think is interesting. So I think there's a pragmatism to that sense of panic, maybe. So maybe we could have another question, maybe following up on this. Let's see if we can keep it rolling.
Hi. Well, the first is a comment, and then I have a couple questions that I think somewhat relate to everyone. So I was thinking a lot about where nature ends and where, in fact, nature is within molecules, within DNA, within the smallest of organisms, which then ultimately so many other things come from, neurons and making things from that. And so, yeah, in terms of thinking of an ecology, where does nature end? And I feel like oftentimes we remove the human from nature, but in fact, human is ultimately nature and natural. Feelings are natural. So where does nature end is one thing. And then I was really curious in terms of propaganda and art. And both of those, I wonder about spreadability and access. And, you know, especially right now, are tying equity into ecology in our future thinking of where we're going. And so as creators, as makers, where, how do we think about accessibility? Sorry, I have more.
Sure.
I have more questions, so I'm just going to put it out there, and you guys can take wherever you want this to go. And then the other is thinking about economy and how ideas are just ideas until they're funded, and how, you know, there's lots of ideas around industrial ecology, a biological economy, and how do we also take that in as creators, as makers, in terms of going forward? So there's a bottom line, there's a global economy that also has to be met. So it's accessibility and global economy.
May I say a small thing to so quite a long time ago, thank you for those questions, and I wrote this book called The Ecological Thought, which was trying to say, like, the way you're asking that first question is very much inspired by what I was calling the ecological thought, which is this sort of intrinsic ecological awareness that we have just as living people living on this planet, right? And the feeling of where does it stop is part of it, which is why in the end you end up letting go of this concept of nature. Nature's always implying this kind of boundary, you know. I mean, just to take a very physical example, where does life stop in a way? Because it depends upon the electromagnetic shield around Earth, right? So it includes that, but that also includes the sun, because we're in a solar system, which is obviously why we have things like photosynthesis. And so when you start to think about how things are interrelated, the way that they are interrelated causes you to imagine a kind of edgeless and centerless thing. You know, I'm looking up at the ceiling actually, because I called it in this book the mesh. Yeah, rather than saying nature, I would say mesh. You know, because it's like the gaps between the things are just as important actually as the connections between the things in this model. You know, and it is infinite in the sense that it is uncountable in advance, which is a lovely thing. You know, that infinity isn't just something going on and on forever, like this answer, but actually something that is intrinsically, surprisingly, beautifully uncountable in advance, right? And I think I would like to say one thing about the second question, namely, what is done in architecture is a very powerful form of propaganda, because you are literally forcing people's bodies to do certain things, right? A certain kind of staircase in a certain kind of position, in a certain kind of building, is going to force people's bodies to inhabit that staircase and go up and down it in certain ways, right? And so actually you are literally convincing the part of the brain that needs to be convinced about this stuff right now, because we know what to do, right? Which is stop burning fossil fuels and arrest the directors of Exxon for something the equivalent of war crimes, because they knew about this for 50 years. Because, you know, it is kind of a slow-motion nuclear bomb explosion that we're in, called global warming. But we're not doing it, right? So we need to convince this part, right? This part processes 50 bits a second, and this part processes 50 billion bits, right? When you're doing architecture, you're talking to this part, yeah?
Maybe one last question, because I don't want to keep us here past 6, because that would be unreasonable. Anyone?
I'm interested in the idea of heat.
I'm sorry?
I'm interested in the idea of heat. We spoke a lot about kind of the heat wave and heat domes. Even panic is, in certain ways, heat-inducing. And so is there a world or a way we can maybe think of designing alongside the heat instead of in opposition of it, as we've learned through like passive strategies and solar path?
As we were just talking, I was just turning my air conditioning up a little bit because it's now, I'm allowing it to go up into the 80s. I'm setting my air conditioning about 78, but if it goes too high while I'm away, it's going to take a lot more energy to bring it down to something like 78. So it's nice to keep it kind of a little bit all the time. So this is like a dilemma, right, that we already have, that we're already dealing with, where we're going along with heat rather than trying to oppose too much coolness to heat. Because unfortunately now the ideal LA temperature of 72, which is what people normally set their aircon to, in this country isn't feasible in general. It's going to use too much energy.
I want to combine a comment about heat to a previous question about the economic. Something that disturbs me a lot about life these days is the move towards making everything fungible, everything, right? Nothing cannot have a price. And there seems to be general confidence that if something doesn't have a price or is priceless, we just haven't analyzed it hard enough yet, right? So I think resisting the fungibility of all, I think, has some very positive values, I think, to consider. So to make certain things maybe outside of the scope of the economic, I think might be worth some consideration with these concerns. Now, with heat, my friend and colleague Michael Osmond did some very interesting work looking at the history of the thermostat and the concept of room temperature, and that has a pretty suspicious history in and of itself. Now, you open up graphic standards, and the thing that always disturbed me the most disturbing page in architectural graphic standards is the psychometric chart of human comfort, and the dew point where, all right, within this range, this is where humans are happy. I found that to be eminently disturbing, that there is such a chart, right, at all. Then you can immediately understand why something like a thermostat would be invented. But then with the thermostat comes the air conditioner and the heater, you have fossil fuels, and then you have how much it costs to heat or cool a space relative to the heat or coolness of whatever that outside is, So maybe there's certain conditions of human comfort or happiness or whatever word we want to start using, to associate with our feelings. I think feelings was a concept we used a lot. I noticed in all four of our presentations, the word feeling figured prominently, and it's a very vague word, but it seems to refer to something that has no price or something that's not fungible. So I think in general, I don't want to propose today anything because I really don't think we have such concepts yet, because we're still dragging along with us a kind of romantic era set of ideas that we're all beholden to. So I think we do need to let go of certain things and start doing some of the intellectual work to invent new language and develop new ideas.
One thing I like about the question is make heat an input to your design system, obviously. We have seen, I'm from Barcelona, so Catalans, we believe, about creative use of design and changing our society and whatever. But we can, so that's kind of my background. But we have seen that the line of desertification in 2010 was in the north of Africa, so areas like Marrakesh and so on. And in how in 2015 those temperatures were not in the north of Africa, so the line of desertification crossed the Mediterranean Sea and was already in the south of Spain. That desertification line that we understand like Europe, Africa, it's no longer like that. So we are not the south of Europe, Spain. We are the northern extended temperature map of Africa. If that continues as it is continuing, in 2020, we have seen these temperatures near Valencia, so that's half of Spain. And I took, you have seen the skaters in the presentation. So we went to that valley to see wildfires that have happened around LA. So it's important to start to change the condition and the context as an input and start to bring those numbers to you, to your design. I think you're about to finish, no, 1 more month to finish thesis. So I think it's amazing, no, to be here, to hear this, to be part of this, and address this in your designs that are being produced as a school. I want to send a message like related to heat, which is, you know, if architecture is the first reason of global warming, and we are a leading school in architecture in the world, and we know people are looking at this school, I think we have a responsibility, no? We have a duty, we have an action to take, no? The designs that will go out of this school in a month from now have to push or address or excite through panic or through, don't get freeze after today, you know, but bring heat. We have a project in Malibu that needs to address heat. We are looking at caves and indigenous performance through caves. So, yeah, make it work, make it an input. Absolutely.
Okay, I want to thank all of you for sticking around. It's late in the summer, and I know like this is around the time of summer and thesis period where you start feeling tired, but also some panic about finishing. So maybe something I'm going to walk away from is there some positive form of panic we can imagine, you know, and not, you know, convince yourself everything's going to go fine by resorting to forms of banality, which is generally my complaint about sustainability mainstream. You know? So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.